Hello, and welcome to STEAM of Consciousness, a program presented by the ARI Podcasting Network and hosted by George Koperna. What is STEAM? STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. During each episode, we will take a few minutes to sit down with professionals in different STEAM-related fields to give them an opportunity to share their story and give their perspectives with the goal of promoting career awareness to potentially interested students, young professionals, and of course, anyone else who shares a fascination with these areas of study. And now, please join us as we tap into the STEAM of consciousness.
Welcome to STEAM of Consciousness. I'm George Koperna, and today we're really happy to be joined by Dr. Rachael Moore. Good morning, Rachael.
Hello, George. How are you?
I understand you're the Managing Director of CarbStrat. Tell me a little bit about what your day-to-day is like.
Well, today's meetings, as is often the case, so CarbStrat is a one-woman consulting firm. I work across the carbon management value chain. It's sort of the intersection of technical policy things. A day varies on what I'm working on. Sometimes it's deep technical work, reading about what's happening in, let's say, CO2 storage. Other days it's back-to-back calls, working with clients, talking to people like yourself in the industry about where things are going. It's always fun, it's always interesting, but there is no typical day right now.
And when you talk about these industries, are you talking more on the geoscience space? Are you talking engineering?
So I work whole value chain. Some of my clients are on the emitting side, in which case they're heavy industry, cement, steel, other types, where they're sort of looking at what they can do to decarbonize. And in that case, okay, they've probably identified their interest in carbon capture and storage. So often we will be discussing what is the market, what is the value chain, why are we doing this? I also work with energy companies, with various actors. More recently, I've started working a little bit with finance on what is the market for carbon management, CCUS, what do we need, what are the risks, that kind of thing.
Super interesting. Now, what kind of degrees do you hold to do this? I mean, this is pretty broad swath here and really fascinating. You have some geoscience degrees. What else?
So I'm a hard rock geochemist by PhD, which is a bit of a random one to be working in this, because a lot of times we'll end up talking to petroleum engineers like yourself, or to people who spent more of their work and careers in the geosciences and the sedimentary side. My PhD was on what happens when you put CO2 into a basalt or an ultramafic rock. I am a geo by background. All of my degrees are related to that. My undergrad was much broader, sort of general geoscience, geochemistry. My master's was paleobiology, which is not only dinosaurs. I didn't do so well in the dinosaur classes, but my master's was much more about how can we look at rocks rather than what exactly we were looking about.
That's super cool. Even for an engineer like me, I've always appreciated the rocks. But if we can go back, I won't say young Dr. Moore, let's say younger Dr. Moore. What got you interested in geoscience in the first place? What was the inciting incident?
Science is cool, I think, is probably where I'd start. So ever since I was a little kid, I've always been a fan of science. My parents would take us to New York City a lot because I grew up about an hour outside, and we'd go to museums, and I would inevitably say, I want to go to like the American Museum of Natural History, or I want to go to the Liberty Science Center, because to me, as much as my mother and father probably hated it, I was always asking why. Why is the sky blue? Why is the moon there? What are the waves? Why do the waves work? And that was kind of why I wanted to become a scientist. I think when I started in high school, first year of undergrad, I was thinking chemistry, because chemistry is cool, the reactions are cool. I could see a pathway for a job as a chemist. But I took my intro to earth sciences classes, and I was like, you know what? but rocks are really cool. And I spent way too long in university on rocks for quite a long time. And now I don't work so much with them, although there's some behind me. Uh, but I work with the things that we can do with the rocks.
That's really interesting. So you talked a little bit about being in New York as younger Dr. Moore, and you know what was your choice structure like? Were you thinking of going to a big university, a big college, or something private? What take us back to what you were thinking of back in the day as the young
Oh
kids.
boy. So I joke that I ran away to Europe at 18. I did not run away. I have a wonderful relationship with my family, but I grew up in Connecticut in a relatively small town by Northeast standards. And my parents were taking us to New York City. They were working to make sure that we understood that there was a world outside of our relatively small town in Connecticut. And was, it was 2007 and I was applying for university, and this was when there was a common application, and I don't know if that still works or exists, but it it didn't cover everything. About half the universities I was applying to, which were major names in the United States, were you had to apply through their own portals, and the other ones you had to apply through the common application. And I had just finished an application to a major university, and I same day we used to get spam letters from all the universities based on your SAT
Mhm.
scores. I got a letter from this small private university in Germany, and it happened to be one of the top five in the German speaking world for chemistry and for earth sciences. And I applied a little bit as a joke because it was midnight and it was just check a couple boxes. Turns out the letter I sent in my application didn't even change the name of the university. Not proud of that, but it happens. And I got in, and I got a pretty significant scholarship package, which matters because my sister is older than me and she was still in university at the time. And my parents were like, okay, do you actually want to do this? And I was like, I don't know. So we made the decision during spring break, rather than to go look at the US schools I got into, to go visit there. And I was able to defer my admission to the top choices in the US. Germany, university's 3 years for your undergrad, and was well ranked. It was very small, about 1,000 people. So the decision was, why not? Worst case, I lose a year and lose probably half of the tuition to go to the equivalent state school in the United States.
Mm.
Best case, I got a degree, and it worked out for me. It was a very good experience. It had about 600 undergrads, 400 grad students with, I think, 90 something different countries. And it was just a great environment.
I mean, that must have been very exciting, but very scary at the same time to just kind of pull up stakes from the Northeast and go to Germany. Did you have a soft landing there? How was the transition, or was there a transition?
It was rough. I mean, I think it's rough for anyone going from their small town environment to a bigger university. This was not a big university, but it was changing countries. It was really interesting. I think it was more difficult than expected. My grades my first year were less good than I would have wanted, perhaps because of that. But in the long run, it worked out. So I've lived in Europe since 2008 in various countries. It's given me opportunities I wouldn't have had if I had gone to a major university in the United States.
And I mean, we're glad you stuck with it because you're doing wonderfully in Europe. But as you mentioned that it's only a 3-year program, and so a lot of the folks that we've talked to on this podcast or just out in the wild, as it were, you know, sometimes after 4 years they still don't know what that next step is. So you had a more compressed timeline for that, and did that put any career pressure on you when you began to approach your final year? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? All of those questions that are a little bit stressful.
Well, George, do you know what you want to do when you grow up? Because I'm still not sure I know what I want to do when I grow up. Um, yes and no. I I was of two minds when I was finishing up uni. Part of me has always wanted to be an academic. So part of me was like, what's the transition? How do I go and become a professor? The other part of me was like, rocks are really cool. I want to go into exploration mining. Um, very different paths. So my bachelor's thesis was on climate reconstruction and on environment in shallow seas. Basically, you
Mm.
look at teeny tiny microorganisms and you can say what temperature they were growing. Um, that was like, oh, I really like this. This is very cool. But at the same time, I actually had an offer to go work in exploration mining. And I was like, okay, maybe I should take this offer. The the country that I was going to be deployed to changed. And in discussion with my family, we decided that wasn't the right choice for me. And so the place I had been doing my thesis had a connection to a different institution, which was able to give me a year-long internship working on climate reconstruction. And so that was presenting me with the pathway of going to the academic, potentially leading towards master's PhD. And so I took that instead, and it was really cool. That's how I ended up going towards the master's in paleobiology, because climate reconstruction, etc. Um, also wasn't the right path, but it was a path that led me onwards. So that's what I ended up doing.
And so, well, let's talk a little bit about your internship and how maybe that seeded an interest that or strengthened an interest that was already there, obviously, based on your undergrad. Um, if I remember, it was maybe a year-long internship, and you didn't after that go, "Hey, I want to go work in the industry now." It was, "I want to explore this more fully,"
Yeah.
or
So I've actually never worked in industry. Um, I I had a couple options but didn't. No, so with that internship, that was like, okay, this climate stuff is really cool. That was when was that? That was 2011, 2012. I don't remember which IPCC reporting cycle it was, but it was really around the time that we were all talking about the hockey stick graph. And I was working on how do we reconstruct paleoclimate. So that made me decide, okay, I want to go to a place where I can get a master's in this. Bristol University in the UK does a fantastic paleobiology program. Some of it's devoted to the kinds of science I was doing, and some of it's devoted to the dinosaurs.
Mhm.
Dinosaurs weren't for me, but I was at that point, I was really on the path of I want to become a professor at a university and do climate research.
And so that immediately rings, I need to go get a PhD. There was there, you know, you talk to a whole bunch of folks that are across these choices, and whether you went into industry or not, it was always a choice that you could make. And I think that how you navigate through that is really the interesting part, right? And so you get your master's degree, and it's immediately, I want to be a professor and I want to go to a graduate school. Was that what your where your headspace was?
I think it was I got my bachelor's and was doing the internship, and it was still I want to be a professor.
Oh.
So my master's, I didn't actually get the project to do the paleoclimate reconstruction at my master's. Partially, I think because they knew I had already done it and they wanted to give it to the other person whose first choice it was. I ended up getting a project that was related to stromatolites, which is early Earth first potential life.
Hmm.
And that project was imaging related. So how can we take pictures of this using something called synchrotron tomography? Think about getting a CT scan in a hospital, but make it really, really, really small. And so during that whole period, I became really interested in the technical side of scientific imaging. How do we understand these rocks, etc.? And I wanted to do a PhD. I want to be a professor. Um, but I was more migrating towards, okay, what is this intersection of geology, imaging, and that kind of thing?
No, and whether it's that or any of these other ultra small images, if we could pop up a picture of them, they're always very cool to look at. It's really eye candy in a lot of ways. And so, did you have a lot of choices for your doctoral program, or were you kind of leaning on the same kind of mentorship program your family and your professors?
So in Europe, I don't actually know how the whole doctoral system works in the United States. In Europe, you typically end up applying for a project. And that project typically has funding, or depending on the type of institution you're applying through, there will be, let's say, 25 projects and 17 have funding, and they will choose based on the candidates. I applied in Europe, there's another pathway where you apply for a project, but the project is funded by the European Union research funds and is a network. It's called a Marie Curie training network. And I applied for a wide variety of PhDs across Europe because you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. But there was one I was really super keen on, and this was this imaging PhD in a Marie Curie network in Paris. And that's the one I ended up accepting the offer on and moving towards. And it was to look at how do we use imaging techniques, be it microscopy or CT or other things, to look at the evolution of the ocean crust and what happens at the ocean crust spreading zones. And it was a super cool topic. It's very relevant, even if it's still quite blue sky science. And so that's the one I chose. And that was the one I was privileged enough to get an offer from.
Neat. And and so while you were there, I assume that it was a 4 year kind of program, much like the U.S. And I didn't get a PhD, so I can't comment on what the PhD program here is in the U.S. I stopped after masters. Um, but did you enjoy that? I mean, it's a lot more research. Did it scratch the imaging itch that you had developed, as it were, to make that eye candy for us?
I did enjoy it. I think everyone I've ever talked to in my own experience, everyone will say a PhD is a difficult process. Um, there's a web comic from years ago of like the current knowledge is this, and then or the current publication is this, and the current knowledge is this, and your PhD is like a little tiny pimple on the sphere of human knowledge. And to me, that was really cool. My PhD also, I had a fantastic supervisor who basically said, we've got a fully funded project. We have some really cool samples. We've got an open box. You are more of an expert in certain imaging techniques than I am. I'm more of an expert in others. Design your project, which is terrifying. And if I could go back and do it again, I would not have done the project I did because the project I did was too big. I what I do now is probably an offset of my PhD. I think big picture. I can focus in on the nitty-gritty, but I look at things from a system level. So I designed basically a series of experiments with associated imaging that looked at what would happen in a natural system with very limited controls, which means that you can't really publish because you can't really figure out what's going on. Um, and with that experience, what I learned is I'm really good at thinking up how we can do things, what we need to investigate, all of these questions, but I absolutely hate doing the lab work. And that was what I realized, you know what, I'm I'm better suited to take this kind of work forwards and work to translate what is the science telling us? Why do we need this? What's going on into language that policymakers, decision makers, non-scientists or engineers can think about. And halfway through is when we started thinking, okay, this has real world applications in the context of CO2 storage, and sort of been working on CCS ever since.
And and so this I find really interesting. So I'm sensing that there was a change in how that, well, I'm not really as interested in the lab work as I thought I'd be. Did that color your career aims at that point in time? I mean, I don't want to bury the lead, but I don't believe you ever became a professor at
No, I never became
university.
a professor.
So how did
Uh,
that color your next life choice, which is you're getting ready to graduate and you have all these options again?
yeah, so you have all these options until you don't have all these options. So my supervisor could give me 6 months as a postdoc, and I was living in France. I was not French. I'm not a European citizen at the time. I was still just an American. So during the summer after I defended, I took, I think it was 4 months off before I started my postdoc. And I was taking more French classes, and I happened to sit next to a guy in my French class, because you have to sit next to people, who happened to be the head of a unit at the International Energy Agency. For those who aren't familiar with the International Energy Agency, it's a intergovernmental organization that is focused on the energy systems. It was founded to address the oil crisis, but it works a lot on energy transitions as well. And he was not in CCS, he was in energy efficiency, but he was like, if this is what you're interested in, if you're interested in policy, you need to have a chat with the person who works on CCS. And so I knew I had my postdoc coming up, followed up, had a chat, and I ended up applying. They weren't hiring at the moment for what they needed. And then I was like, okay, my postdoc is ending. At this point, I had a citizenship application pending. I needed a job. And my French wasn't fluent. So I was applying for jobs that were sort of consulting-ish, project management-ish, that kind of genre. And in the end, it's not glamorous. I took the first one that came in because I needed a job because I had a citizenship application pending. And that was to work on project management for a consulting firm for European projects. This is not project management as in we are developing an infrastructure project, you're the PM. This is you are a consortium of different institutions who are funded through European projects. Here is the whole deliverable list, that kind of project management. And it wasn't for me, but I needed a job. And the other thing that sort of consulting firm did was they worked on what's called innovation consulting, on grant development. And they quite rapidly realized in 2019, which was right after I joined, that the innovation fund was happening and lots of companies were getting interested in CCS. And they just hired this person as a project manager who happens to know CCS.
Mhm.
And that's sort of how I ended up there, into working on CCS from an innovation point of view. And then to go back to the lead, about 18 months later, I left to join the International Energy Agency.
And so was that a difficult choice, or was it something you thought you always wanted to do because the project management of the innovation entity just wasn't what you wanted?
It was not a difficult choice. At that point, and I've said this before, um, because at this point, this was my first job after my PhD, postdoc, etc. And I was asked several times, okay, you were only there for 18 months. Why did you leave? And the easy response is when the International Energy Agency gives you a call, you don't say no. And it's not to be flippant. If you want to work on the technical aspects of what I was working on from a policy angle, not from a technical angle, but translating it to something policy and decision makers understand, there is no better place. And it was an incredibly amazing opportunity. I met so many people who are very, very influential in our industry. I got to write a whole report for the IEA that I can claim that I wrote the CO2 storage handbook for the IEA. It's something I would never, ever regret.
That's fantastic. And, you know, obviously we introduced you as someone who's not at the IEA or
Yep.
IEA GHG anymore, which is the greenhouse gas portion of the IEA. What was the thinking there in all right, my time's coming up at the IEA, what's next? And take us through that.
So, to be a good ex-IEA alumni, I do have to say the IEA GHG is a technology collaboration platform of the IEA. They are separate entities. And in the CCUS space, there's a fair amount of confusion, but they do very different things.
Mhm.
And one of the things I did at the IEA, other than write about storage, was I was their counterpart to the government of Nigeria, because the government of Nigeria was very interested in understanding how they can move forwards on CCS. And this is all public information, so I'm not breaching any boundaries by saying this. That was a very, very interesting learning experience, because it meant that we were working with government to figure out how can they start basically at zero to build up the internal capacity of the government, but also in the country itself to understand what is this. And when after I finished my big report on CO2 storage at the IEA, I heard that the World Bank CCS Trust Fund, which closed last August, needed a new consultant because the previous consultant was getting hired by my ex-boss who had already left.
Mhm.
It's amazing. CCS is quite a small community still, and we all sort of know each other, as you well know. And that opportunity was very interesting, because when you become a consultant for the World Bank, you can only work a maximum of 150 days a year. It's a contract position. There is no stability, nothing like that. But it was coming at a time when I had delivered what I had been hired to do at the IEA. And if I wanted to stay sort of as a subject matter expert on CO2 storage, it probably wasn't going to be there, because they weren't looking to do significant new work on CCS in that context. And the World Bank opportunity meant that I could go and explore what's happening with CCS in developing countries, which I felt was very important because it's climate technology. These are places where emissions will be increasing, etc. The other thing that's cool about it, which leads me to where I am now, is it's only half time. And so that gave me the opportunity to first take a little bit of a break, because I hadn't really taken one since my PhD and hadn't really gotten a chance to think of what do I want to do when I grow up. Still don't know, but it's neither here nor there. Then it also gave me the opportunity to say, you know what, I think I want to go out on my own. And that's what I do today. So I'm the managing director and sole employee of CarbStrat. Part of the reason why I took that leap was because I was in a position where I was getting other offers. And it's a privileged position, I'm not going to lie, but I was getting offers by relatively significant consultancies saying, we want you to come in and build a CCS business line or an industrial decarbonization business line, etc. But when it was getting to the final offer stage, it was, well, we decided you don't have as much experience as we thought you did. You don't necessarily meet these criteria. So we're going to hire you not in a managerial role to build the business line, but much lower. And I'm being transparent about this because honestly, it was a little bit humiliating, but it was also just not okay. That was happening to me because they were seeing someone who at the time was 32, who wasn't meeting the we want 10 years experience checkboxes. But the worst part was, one of those calls, the person said to me, I don't know why you applied. You're not qualified. And my response was, I have never applied to work at your company. You called me.
Mm-hmm.
I had never sent out an application, but after 4 companies did that to me, I was just like, if they think I can do this, well, I can try. And if it doesn't work, I'm get a real job.
Well, I find that interesting because I mean, the way CCS was, you were right at that crux where it was you were had significant experience compared
Oh yeah.
to I mean, few people had as much as folks like me at that point in time.
No, you're the
And
original generation,
and
George.
so and you talk about a small network, it still is for those groups as today.
Yeah.
And there are very few people that could have done what they were asking to do, and certainly you were one of them. You had well more experience than people that do today that are been doing this for 2 3 years. You had numerous years, and that was kind of the gentle push to go, hey, me, did you rely on anybody else to kind of a conciliatory mentor, back to friends and family again to kind of go, hey, can I do this?
It was a little bit back to friends and family. It was also, it wasn't much of a risk. The risk was whatever money I put in to establish the company was the only thing that was at risk, at least for the first 6 to 12 months, because I had the World Bank for half time.
Mhm.
And so because that in Europe our salaries are generally lower, but I was hired as if I was working in the US. Uh, it is also because it's an international organization, not taxable. So I had very limited financial risk. I didn't have children. I didn't have a mortgage. It was one of those, this is the perfect time to try something because worst case, I got to eat cup noodle and that kind of thing. Um, it then so happened, I also went and did this because at the same time I was having these interviews with these companies, I was getting calls from the small network that is CCS being like, hey, Rachel, are you available? Can you do
Mhm.
something? And I'd be like, well, maybe in 3 months when I get the paperwork in order. So I sort of, when the company was launched, which was November 23, I had very small things coming in immediately. And I also had something come in that was very, very big at the exact moment when the World Bank stuff was winding down. So that gave me at least, well, it's gotten me to here. And it's then it becomes about relationship management. And there's lots of people who will give me a call and be like, hey, Rachel, are you available to do this? And some days the answer is yes, and the other days the answer is no. It depends on capacity.
Mhm. And no secret, you've been here for over 2 years now on your own. And what do you love about it?
I really enjoy that everything is different. I can't get bored because I don't think I've had one engagement that is more than like 25% like any other engagement. And part of that's because I work across the entire value chain. I work globally. It's it's very, very dynamic. It's quite exciting. I think one of my favorite projects was the really big one that was publicly released about a month ago. That took me back to my PhD. I worked with the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative on what is CO2 storage in mafics and ultramafics. And I got to be really geeky and go deep into the science, the reactive transport modeling, the what is a large igneous province. Um, but I really enjoy how dynamic the work is. And I really enjoy that I get to sort of enlarge my network. A lot of my work is kind of like matchmaking in some ways. I think for several of my clients, my job is you go talk to you and together you can move forwards. And then a lot of other work is really about what is this? Why are we doing this? How does this contribute to what we want out of the planet? And I think that's what I really enjoy is I feel like most days I've made a difference.
And I think you've really encapsulated quite well what it is to be a consultant. And let's close on this.
Yeah.
If you were to go back to again younger Dr. Moore or someone in her shoes, what advice would you give them?
So I am always willing to take time to talk to PhD students who are coming up or undergrads, etc., because I think that's important. I think the advice I give younger me or I give to people who I have these conversations is it's not always obvious what the right path for you is. And sometimes the right choice is not going to be the easiest, but if you are really interested in a specific aspect of science or engineering or whatever, follow it until it's not what you need. Because there's always a connection, there's always a build. I mean, I don't know how many times you've had to reinvent what you've been working on because oil markets have changed, gas markets have changed, CCS happened. The one thing that's consistent about working in science and engineering is that you keep learning and you keep exploring. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that.
Well, fantastic. This has been a presentation of the ARI Podcasting Network. Thank you for tuning in to Stream of Consciousness. Especially thank you to Dr. Rachael Moore and our own producer, Ryan Kessler. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to listen to new episodes of Stream of Consciousness available on your preferred podcast listening station.